Alright, now we can go on to the Christmas Chronicles 2, which the first one was like really well liked and was like extremely successful in regards to like Netflix numbers. But it's fine. Like it's just kind of there. But obviously the main appeal is what its selling point was. Kurt Russell in this role as Santa. That's also he's kind of got this almost no bullshit way about himself, but he's also got that really sort of softness in him and that warmth to him. And it was a relatively like charming movie, which I think is what just made it really easy to find such a big audience and so much appeal to so many people. And this one has promise because it's a director that is like it's changing directors as far as finding a more recognizable one to do this one, which is interesting. That being Chris Columbus, obviously, who I think was at least a producer on the other one. But obviously, between the Home Alone movies and the first two Harry Potter movies and stuff like that, this is Mrs. Doubtfire. Chris Columbus really has a hand on this. A lot of people think maybe I don't know if he has like too soft of a touch or something, but I feel like there's a nice, and that could be nostalgia or whatever. But I feel like if anybody was going to have a grip on this movie, we might as well give it to him. But the thing is that this movie does have a lot going on. I mean, the beginning is kind of weird, where we start off with what appears to be a vengeful human elf, played by Julia Dennison, who we love so much in Hunt for the Wilder People, and not necessarily so much in Deadpool 2. That's probably just me, though. And he appears to have some sort of plan to get into the North Pole to wreak some sort of havoc. We're not quite sure at that point. So after that, then we cut to Cancun, where our protagonists from the first movie are, with their mom, Kimberly Williams, still. But now we have the familiar plot line of that she might be in the process of replacing their dad, in this case with Tyrese, um, and who I didn't know was in this, so that was kind of surprising to see him. And he has a child as well that they have to try to bond with, and that is the kid that was the main kid in the Witches remake that we just saw. So naturally, for some reason, we have to replace certain characters. So the brother, Teddy, is just going to kind of be left behind. He's just here, he's just chilling out in Cancun, he doesn't really want to be anywhere else. So the new kid is going to kind of take his place as we go into the adventure angle of this movie, where the evil elf, who is named Belsnickel, uh, throws them into the North Pole by way of a golf cart, so that they can help him, inadvertently help him get back into the North Pole so that he can wreak havoc. And if that sounds like a lot's going on, that's like not even half of it. This movie is incredibly busy, but obviously the main drawing point to this is now not just seeing Kurt Russell as Santa again, reprising the role just as well as he played it in the first, but the reveal at the end of that one that Goldie Hawn was his Mrs. Claus, and now who is now going to have a more prominent role, especially now that we're going into the North Pole, and that's where a lot of the movie is done, in that particular village that's run by Santa and Mrs. Claus and all of the elves. And yeah, especially their appeal together is really fun to watch, especially since we've seen them in stuff as old as Overboard and, like Swing Shift around the time they first met. And to see that still carry over just as strong, if not stronger, all these years later, co-starring with each other again, it's really nice. And there's also some great moments that Kurt Russell gets in regards to what he brings to the character in particular, like the whole idea of the elves sort of being almost uncomfortably minion-like. Where I remember their reveal in the first movie was kind of jarring and unexpected, and maybe not in the best way, but I feel like I'm kind of used to it now that this movie has come along. Especially since the elves are much more prominent in this one, which might sound like a nightmare, but like I said, the movie's just so busy, it doesn't really get stuck on one thing, so that's for better or worse, I guess. But like there's one particular moment where it shows off how much I love the way Russell plays this character. Where while he does have that warmth to him for sure, which is like really most of the performance is the warmth part of it. But sometimes we get these moments when there's an elf that's eating a bunch of candy canes that it shouldn't be. And while he, in any other case, Santa would give him a look like saying like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. Russell gives this elf a look that's eating the candy canes he's not supposed to that looks like he's genuinely pissed off. And it's like that's kind of the beauty of casting Russell in this part, is to be able to balance that with the actual warmth that really comes through. And that also keeps coming through when we see the North Pole in kind of all of its glory, when we gonna get to see its ins and outs and how it functions, and then we get scenes like inevitably food scenes, where we get the moment where usually there's the whole thing where like their whole diet is like sweets we saw and stuff like Elf. But the twist that they have put on this is that they have like broccoli cake, which is like chocolate, but it's like green, and there's like brownies that are supposed to be like lima beans and carrots and stuff like that, and it's like even though they're like cakes and brownies and stuff like that, they taste like cakes and brownies. It's basically the same as eating broccoli or lima beans or carrots or whatever, and that's something that's sort of like it's like has that fantastical element and kind of brings in the magic. It's something that you would see in like Hook or something, or like Coraline, a much friendlier, more welcoming Coraline. And so that's the kind of stuff that kind of adds to the appeal. Also, that kind of brings the magic to the whole thing. The stuff that's missing from a lot of like recent Christmas movies that kind of brings back the way Christmas movies kind of used to feel in a particular time. And we get some jokes here and there, some of which feel like direct references to some of Columbus's work. Like, there's a funny moment when they're watching It's a Wonderful Life that appears to be dubbed in Elvish, which is funny in itself, but I'm assuming also has to be a direct reference to Home Alone when they in both movies when they're watching a dubbed version of It's a Wonderful Life, depending on where they are. But also there's stuff in regards to Columbus's other work where one of the things going on here is Bell Sniggle comes in and distributes elf bane throughout the whole village so that all the elves basically turn bad, hence basically turning them into gremlins, which of course was written by Columbus, so I feel like that's not an accident either. But that's just one of the many problems. It's not problems in regards to what the conflicts are in the story. But yeah, also kind of problems also because the movie maybe is a little too busy for its own good, and it's a hard thing to kind of go through because this is probably the kind of thing you want in a movie that's aimed at children or at least families. When there's not really, it doesn't really feel like there's a dull spot. Like there's not really an area where it drags because it's like constantly doing something else with like every new scene. There's like a new problem where we have there's this like giant cat that's going around that gets loose and eventually attacks one of the reindeer. I think it's Dancer. So Dancer spends the whole movie injured, and that's where a lot of Goldie Hawn's screen time ends up going, is making sure Dancer doesn't die. And then there's the whole thing where Bell Sniggle has come and he has taken the star that gives like the whole village its power, which means without that star the village is going to go dark, which means Christmas can't happen. And then it becomes basically a game of hot potato with this star for a lot of the runtime, with Bell Sniggle just kind of coming and going. Sometimes like in mid-conflict he'll just fly away. Or he'll just randomly appear again in his little like suit up sleigh or whatever it is. But a lot of the conflict does come from the elves being out of control. So we've got the new kid that has been given exploding gingerbread cookies by Mrs. Claus that he can fight with. They keep changing the movie marquee. It starts off with there's a little movie theater in the village that just plays Elf at all times. And then when the elves are bad, it plays Bad Santa, which is kind of a funny image. So, sort of like, it's almost like you have the image of the gremlins watching Snow White. I really want to see some really angry elves watching Bad Santa. But of course, being a family movie, we're not going to get that scene, but it's implied. There are cases where it does feel like the movie's in the wrong era. maybe 20 years out of its era, and it makes you wonder how out of touch some of the makers are. Like, to show that, the one particular scene to show how out of control the elves are, they're dancing around to I Shit You Not, Who Let the Dogs Out. I thought we buried that song like 15 years ago, but every now and then it just resurfaces for some reason in movies that are aimed at kids that are not even like barely a fourth of the age of that song. But yeah, so stuff like that feels like a bit of a miscalculation. But like I said, it does know how to keep itself busy. We even get to a point where they like they like tear a hole into time, and they go back and they end up in an airport in 1990. And what's really weird about this is, maybe just because I just talked about it at the beginning of last month, but the idea that this is basically the plot of the Stephen King story, The Langoliers. Like, the Christmas Chronicles 2 becomes The Langoliers for a second. um, and it does go in, like, an interesting and heartfelt direction. Like I said, it just feels like so much is happening, like, non-stop. And like I said, I can't tell if I admire that about it or not, or if it needs to settle the hell down. Because eventually, while we're at this airport, we also get another musical number, like the one in the jail cell in the first movie. And yes, his saxophone does come back. It can materialize because he's Santa. And it's obviously going to be much bigger, like everything else in this movie. And I guess the question is just, do you prefer bigger? Because that's what you're gonna get, like, in full, like, in every aspect. It's like the first movie, but so much bigger, or trying to be so much bigger. But there are times where it can just seem like really overstuffed, or like way too big for its own good. And it's a lot to keep up with all that's going on here. And a lot of it feels pointless because it's a case where, like the star constantly changing hands. It's a case of it actually starts off in a comedic moment when Belsnickel has the star and Santa just walks up and just takes it out of his hand, and it's like, there's not a conflict now. That would have been hilarious if that was the extent of the star conflict. But no, Belsnickel keeps getting his hands back on it. But like every time it changes hands to one, it gets back into the others relatively quickly. And it's like there's a whole chunk you could just take out of this movie, where the star's just changing hands, and the movie would not be any different. Like the plot would have moved on much faster without anything being missing. So I don't know. There's that, but like every new development is so like out of left field. It feels like every new development is like a new movie starting, or like a new movie's conflict. So I mean, if you're like a sort of getting everything you can for the price of one kind of viewer, that's what you'd be getting out of this. But there's a lot here, and it's I don't know. Maybe I could probably argue it's more entertaining than the first one because of how much it's moving around. But it gave the first one had a lot more chances to like settle down and be like heartfelt and like kind of stop and do its thing and like get its message and all that. If this is a message thing, it's like kind of barely here. And usually Christmas movies are like the ultimate message movie. But it's just so busy with all of its action and all of its developments and all of this stuff going on. Like I said, there are some occasions where we have, unexpected heartfelt moments, but for the most part, it's just a lot of action going on, and it almost feels like it's kind of desperate in trying to keep up with the attention spans of children, and like saying, whatever you do, don't walk away from the TV. Here, we'll give you something else. Here's an exploding cookie. Here's two sleighs playing chicken with each other. Here's a giant cat that's gonna possibly kill one of the reindeer. It's just constant and constant and constant. And there's a whole other set of elves that I'm pretty sure one of which is Malcolm McDowell, and they're basically like those rock trolls or whatever they were in Frozen. That's basically all they are. which you think are gonna help this out because they can create a new star. But once they go through the whole trouble of introducing these new set of elves, they're in this whole other land. They can make a whole new star. The star gets stolen again. It starts all over again. So that's basically what this movie is. Just a movie that refuses to stop, and maybe that's part of its appeal. People will probably actually quite like that about it. And like I said, in regards to movies like this, it's always an upside if it's at least not boring. And if there's one thing you can say about this movie, it certainly isn't boring. So it's got that going for it. I know it's gotten some pretty bad reviews, especially compared to the first one, but I don't really. I mean, maybe it's because of that, because the movie's so busy, is why that's probably happening. But I mean, like I said, if it can keep it going that much, it's there's something going on there. They certainly didn't run out of ideas, so it's got that. Well, I don't know. The fact that the star kind of just keeps changing hands is kind of puts us in a loop for a while there. But it ends up finding other places to go the further it goes along. So yeah, we get origin stories, all of that stuff. It's just nonstop, and it feels like it makes the movie feel really long because there's so much in it. It feels like so many different developments from so many different other movies. But it's because it's like an hour 55, which feels very long already. But like 11 or 12 minutes of that is credit, so it's really just an hour 40 something. But it still feels really long, because especially for the kind of movie that it is, from that perspective, because there's just so much going on. But maybe that's why it might actually work. I don't know. So that's pretty much where I am with this. I can imagine this. I'll probably, because of family, I'll probably end up seeing this again. Uh, and it won't be entirely excruciating because, like I said, at least it keeps you busy as a viewer. So there's that. So that's pretty much where I'm going to have to leave this. So as usual, we're going to keep going throughout this month, going through the new Fargo season and all these new releases, and just going right on to the next one. So until the next one, I think that's it.